The sun was slipping behind the golden hills of Dusty Creek, casting long shadows across the dry pastureland. The air was thick with the scent of hay, sun-warmed leather, and dust, the kind that clung to boots and memories alike. It was auction day at Hartstone Ranch, and the wooden bleachers groaned under the weight of aging cowboys and their weathered silence, their wide-brimmed hats casting shadows over cautious eyes. Amidst the familiar figures of old cattlemen and seasoned horse traders stood someone different. Evelyn Hart, 24, knelt in the grass, her black riding helmet gleaming faintly in the fading light. A fitted vest hugged her frame over a crisp white shirt. She was quiet, one knee pressed into the earth, her gaze fixed on the horse in front of her, a chestnut stallion with a bold white blaze down his face and tired, mistrusting eyes. His name, scrawled half-heartedly in chalk on the holding pen, was Rustwood Fire. He was the last horse of the day, and not a single hand had been raised for him. A murmur of disinterest passed through the bleachers. Calder Voss, a local rancher with 30 years of auctions behind him, leaned toward the man next to him and whispered, "That one's trouble. Broke 3 handlers in a month. Wouldn't even load into a trailer last week." The auctioneer, his voice hoarse from hours of barking bids, tapped the microphone and sighed. "All right, folks. Last call. $10 starts the bid on Rustwood Fire. Anyone?" Silence. Evelyn didn't move. She reached out slowly, fingers grazing the soft velvet of the stallion's muzzle. He flinched, but didn't pull away. Then, without a word, she raised her hand. The gavel hit the wood with a sharp crack. "Sold." The sound echoed across the arena like a thunderclap. Some laughed. Others shook their heads. What did this city girl think she was doing? A few smirked, including Talon Whitaker, who crossed his arms and muttered, "She just bought herself a death wish." But Evelyn barely heard them. She stood up slowly, never taking her eyes off Rustwood Fire. There was something in his gaze that held her, something fractured, yet familiar. She didn't see a beast. She saw a survivor. And somewhere deep inside, she felt an ache that told her she wasn't the only one carrying broken pieces. Back near the fence, Marla Jennings, manager of Hartstone Ranch and a woman with a spine of steel, narrowed her eyes. "She's got her mother's stubborn streak," she murmured to herself. "And her father's need to fix things that can't be fixed." Evelyn led the horse toward her trailer, the reins slack in her hand. To everyone's surprise, Rustwood followed, not calm, not tamed, but willing. Something about the girl's presence disarmed him in a way no one had seen before. High in the bleachers, Jaron Creed, a retired vet who knew every horse born in Dusty Creek for the past 2 decades, sat frozen. There was something about that stallion. Something in the way he moved, in the scar hidden just beneath his mane. But he said nothing. As the crowd began to thin, Evelyn climbed into the driver's seat of her old Ford pickup. The sky had turned a deep indigo, and the night air carried the lonely hum of crickets. In the passenger mirror, she saw Rustwood Fire standing patiently inside the trailer, still and quiet, as if he knew something no one else did. What she didn't know, what no one did, was that this wasn't just an auction gone wrong. She hadn't just bought a horse. She had stepped into a story long buried, one that tied her own family's past to a secret no one had dared to speak aloud. And that secret was about to rise. The trailer rocked gently as Evelyn pulled onto the long gravel road leading back to the old stables behind Hartstone Ranch. Crickets filled the silence between the low hum of the engine and the rattling chains. Rustwood Fire hadn't made a sound the entire drive, but she could feel the tension radiating from the trailer like heat. She wasn't sure if it was fear, anger, or something else entirely, but she knew it wasn't nothing. Horses didn't go silent unless they'd been taught to stop speaking. As she backed the trailer into the barn's open mouth, the headlights flickered against the weathered wood, revealing dust suspended like ghosts in the air. The stable smelled of linseed oil and old hay, comforting in a strange way. Evelyn stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, and walked around to the back. When she opened the ramp, Rustwood stood there, rigid but alert, his breath misting into the cooling night. He didn't bolt, didn't resist. He simply stared at her, as if waiting for her to flinch first. Marla Jennings appeared at the edge of the barn, arms folded, her voice a quiet echo. "You really think you're gonna fix him?" she asked. There wasn't sarcasm in her tone, not quite, just a warning buried in resignation. Evelyn didn't answer. Instead, she clicked her tongue softly and took the lead rope. The stallion stepped forward, slow but deliberate, hooves thudding against the ramp with an eerie finality. Marla watched them disappear into the barn, then turned and walked away. Inside the stable, Evelyn led Rustwood into stall 7, her father's old stall, unused for nearly a decade. As she slid the wooden gate closed, her fingers grazed a carved name in the post, Hart. It was faded, but still there. Her chest tightened. She hadn't been in this part of the barn since she was 14. Back when her father, Bowen Maddox, was still alive. Back before everything fell apart. Rustwood circled once in the stall before settling against the back wall, ears twitching but eyes steady. Evelyn leaned against the gate and watched him in silence. "I don't know what they did to you," she whispered, "but I know what it's like to be left behind." Her voice cracked slightly. She didn't cry, not yet, but something shifted inside her. A quiet pact between them, born not of trust, but of shared hurt. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and somewhere beyond the hills, a light flickered on in an old farmhouse. And behind Evelyn, buried deep under layers of hay and thyme, an envelope marked Grace Monroe, confidential, slid loose from a crack in the wooden wall. The envelope sat untouched on the edge of the tackroom table, its corners curled from time and the faint outline of hoofprints etched in the dust nearby. Evelyn stared at the name, Grace Monroe, written in slanted cursive that looked strangely familiar. She had found it that morning while cleaning out stall 7, half buried beneath a stack of rotted burlap. Her hands had trembled when she pulled it out. The handwriting. It stirred something old in her, something buried alongside the scent of her father's cologne and the sound of his boots crossing the barn floor. She hadn't opened it. Not yet. Something told her it wasn't meant to be read casually, not with half a sandwich in one hand and a bucket of grain in the other. No, this letter carried weight. She felt it the moment she touched it, like it had been waiting for someone, maybe her, for a long, long time. Outside, the morning sun warmed the paddock, and Rustwood Fire stood quietly in the far corner, nose to the wind. He had refused to let her saddle him, but hadn't bucked or reared either. He just watched her, always watching, as if trying to decide whether she was worth trusting. Evelyn leaned against the fence, arms crossed, heart caught somewhere between hope and hesitation. "He's been here before, hasn't he?" she asked softly, though no one was around to hear. The breeze offered no answer, but her gut whispered yes. Later that afternoon, Sadie Ellsworth, a family friend and local historian, stopped by to drop off old feed records for Marla. When Evelyn casually asked if she had ever heard the name Grace Monroe, Sadie froze mid-sentence, the papers in her hand slipping slightly. "Where did you hear that name?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Evelyn shrugged, masking the unease prickling down her spine. "Found it on an envelope." "Oh, in stall 7. Sadie blinked, then cleared her throat. She was involved with your father. Back in the early days. Before he married your mom. People said she was trouble. Disappeared after a big fight with Bowen. No one really talks about her anymore." That night, Evelyn sat alone in the barn loft, envelope in her lap, the flicker of a lantern casting shadows across her face. The horses below shuffled in their stalls, restless. Her fingers hovered over the flap. Part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know what was inside. But Rustwood Fire snorted once, sharply, and Evelyn looked up, startled. As if the horse knew. As if he remembered. The envelope felt heavier in her hands now, as if absorbing the weight of her hesitation. Evelyn sat cross-legged in the loft, her fingers gently peeling open the brittle paper. The smell of aged ink and dust rose from the page like a ghost, delicate, forgotten, and undeniably real. The letter inside was handwritten, its edges frayed and stained. The ink had faded in places, but the emotion behind each word bled through with unsettling clarity. Bowen, I never meant to run. You have to believe that. What I did to protect something bigger than us, bigger than either of us could understand at the time. I hope someday, if she finds this, she'll know the truth. Evelyn's eyes paused on that last sentence, her breath catching in her throat. She. The word hung in her chest like a bell tolling in slow motion. Was Grace Monroe speaking about her? Did she know Evelyn would find this letter? The thought stirred something ancient inside her, a quiet ache, a thread she didn't know had always been tangled in her. She read on. The colt wasn't supposed to survive. That's why I left. I couldn't let them use him. There were papers, forged pedigrees. Bowen, I'm so sorry. I couldn't carry the lie anymore. You knew what he was, but you chose silence. And I couldn't. Evelyn lowered the letter slowly, the edges trembling in her grip. A colt? Forged records? Her father involved in something dishonest? It didn't make sense. Bowen had been stern, yes, but he was known for his integrity. Or at least, that's what everyone always said. She'd never imagined him capable of hiding something like this. Yet the letter was real. And suddenly, Rustwood Fire wasn't just a horse with a temper. He was part of something buried. Something people had tried very hard to forget. Below, the barn groaned in the rising wind. Rustwood shifted in his stall, hooves striking the boards with a low thud. Evelyn stood and moved toward the edge of the loft, leaning over to watch him. He was pacing now, agitated, ears flat. "You remember her, don't you?" she whispered. The stallion paused, eyes lifting to meet hers in the dim light. And for a fleeting second, Evelyn swore she saw recognition. Something was unraveling. Not just the past, but her own understanding of who her father was, and who she really was. She folded the letter and pressed it to her chest, heart thudding with a new and unfamiliar rhythm. The next morning brought a restless kind of urgency. Evelyn didn't sleep much. Her mind had been consumed by Grace's letter and the vague but damning hints of a secret breeding operation. Forged pedigrees. A colt that wasn't supposed to live. She couldn't shake the feeling that Rustwood Fire was more than just a forgotten animal, that he was, in some way, the reason for Grace's disappearance, and maybe even her father's silence. Determined, she drove into town and parked outside the small, red-brick building that housed the county livestock registry. Inside, the air was stale and smelled of old paper and copier toner. An older man behind the desk squinted at her over gold-rimmed glasses. "What can I help you with, miss?" Evelyn offered a tight smile. "I'm looking for any registration papers connected to a stallion named Rustwood Fire. Or anything under the Maddox name." "Bowen Maddox." The man nodded slowly and disappeared into the back. 15 minutes later, he returned with a folder, thinner than expected. "Not much here. But there is something odd. This one's got a registered sire listed, but no dam. That's rare. Almost never happens." Evelyn took the paper with shaky hands. Rustwood Fire's name sat printed neatly at the top. Beneath it, his sire, Talon's Reign, a famous bloodline known for strength and speed, horses bred for competition, worth hundreds of thousands. But the dam field was blank. Just a dash. No farm, no birth records, no maternal lineage at all. Her stomach turned. Could that be a mistake? Not if it came through official channels, the man said, adjusting his glasses. Someone wanted this horse registered, but didn't want the mother known. That only happens when there's something to hide. Driving back to the ranch, The silence in the cab was suffocating. Evelyn kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Rustwood staring back at her like he understood. When she pulled up beside the barn, Lila Red, a stable hand who had worked with Bowen years ago, stood waiting, arms folded. Her face was pale. "I heard you've been asking about Rustwood," she said without preamble. "You need to stop." Evelyn stiffened. "Why?" "Because you're digging into things that people around here don't want dug up," Lila said quietly. "Rustwood's not just any horse. He was supposed to disappear years ago. But your father, he couldn't do it." Evelyn's heart pounded. "What do you mean, disappear?" Lila hesitated, then turned and walked away, leaving Evelyn with a stallion who shouldn't exist, and a truth no one wanted to face. Evelyn found herself back at the barn after sundown, the shadows deeper than usual and the air heavier with silence. She had walked the perimeter 3 times, hoping the movement would still her thoughts. But they only churned faster. Rustwood Fire stood calm in his stall, but his eyes tracked her every step, alert, like he was waiting for her to understand something only he could remember. She finally stepped into the tack room and locked the door behind her. The letter from Grace was spread across the table, next to Rustwood's registration form. She read them again, this time slower, letting each word etch itself deeper into her. Her father's name, the forged bloodline, the missing dam, the line that echoed again and again, the colt wasn't supposed to survive. There was only one person left who might know the full truth, and who had been silent for too long. She drove out toward the edge of town, where the land flattened into wide, dry fields. The house was modest, built of faded brick and sitting behind a gate that creaked like a warning. Jaron Creed was on the porch, nursing a black coffee and watching the stars like they owed him something. He didn't seem surprised to see her. "You're your father's daughter," he said as she climbed the steps. "I knew you'd come eventually." Evelyn didn't bother with pleasantries. Why was Rustwood Fire supposed to disappear? Jaron stared at her for a long moment, then gestured for her to sit. "Because he wasn't meant to exist. He was the result of a breeding that broke every rule in the book. Grace didn't run away. She was forced out for trying to expose it. Your father, he tried to fix it, but by then, too many people were involved." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Fix what, exactly?" Jaron looked away. Rustwood's dam was a wild mare from a restricted federal range. She was never meant to be bred, especially not with a high-dollar stud like Talon's Reign. Bowen forged the papers. Grace found out and threatened to report it. That's when things fell apart. A cold stillness settled between them. Evelyn's father, the man she'd idolized, had broken the law. Lied. And possibly destroyed a woman's life to protect it. But he couldn't let them put the colt down, Jaron added softly. So he hid him, changed the brand, buried the truth. And now that truth was staring back at Evelyn, from the eyes of a stallion no one was ever supposed to ride. Evelyn didn't drive home that night. She sat in her truck outside the barn, headlights off, hands gripping the steering wheel as if the truth might shake loose if she let go. Jaron's words repeated over and over in her mind, the forbidden mare, the forged papers, her father's silence. Everything she thought she knew about Bowen Maddox had cracked like old leather under pressure. The wind pushed softly through the tall grass as she finally stepped out, boots sinking into the dirt with each heavy step. Inside the barn, it was darker than usual. A single bulb buzzed faintly near the tack room, casting long, soft shadows that danced like ghosts across the wooden walls. Rustwood Fire stood in the corner of his stall, completely still, yet fully aware of her presence. When she approached, he didn't flinch, just watched. "I know now," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I know what they did to you." She unlatched the stall gate slowly, every movement deliberate, respectful. Rustwood didn't back away. Evelyn stepped inside, her heart pounding, and reached for his halter. For the first time, he didn't toss his head. His breathing slowed. She could hear her own blood pulsing in her ears, could smell the damp hay beneath her boots. And then she laid her forehead against his, and he didn't move. Tears came, hot and uninvited. Not because of guilt, but because of grief. Grief for her father. For Grace. For the lies that had stretched over decades and stolen the freedom of someone, innocent. She didn't sob. The pain came quieter than that. Just trembling shoulders and shallow breaths, and a single tear that ran down Rustwood's face, too. Or maybe it was her own. Behind her, a soft creak echoed. She turned sharply, heart jumping, but no one was there. Just the loft above, where she'd found Grace's letter. A shiver crawled down her spine. She thought of Grace again, and how the woman's name had disappeared from every town record after 2006. No forwarding address. No obituary. No return. Only the letter. And the horse. Evelyn stepped back and closed the stall gently. She looked at Rustwood one last time before heading toward the loft again. She had to know if there was more. More letters, more truth, more pieces. Because now she didn't just want to save Rustwood. She needed to finish what Grace started. The loft was colder than she remembered. The air was thinner up there, drier too, laced with the scent of old hay, oil, and time. Evelyn climbed the ladder slowly, her flashlight cutting through the shadows in sharp beams. Dust swirled like smoke with every movement, disturbed for the first time in what felt like years. The last time she'd stood up there, she was a child. And she hadn't known then how many secrets the barn had swallowed whole. She moved crates aside, her hands brushing over worn leather tack and boxes marked with faded handwriting. One box near the back caught her eye, an old trunk with the initials GM carved in the top. Evelyn dropped to her knees, heart drumming. She unlatched the rusted clasp and opened the lid. Inside, wrapped in yellowed fabric, were dozens of letters. Stacks of them. Each one signed Grace Monroe. Her breath caught. She unfolded the first one. It wasn't addressed to her father. It was addressed to Sadie Ellsworth. The letter dated back 17 years, written in Grace's sharp, elegant script. He told me to keep quiet. Said no one would believe me. But I know what they did to the foals. Not just Rustwood. There were others. Some were sold, others vanished. Sadie, if anything happens to me, don't let them erase him. Evelyn's pulse raced. Sadie, the same woman who told her Grace was trouble. The same Sadie who had gone pale at the mention of her name. She had known all along. About Grace. About Rustwood. About her father's role. She reached deeper into the trunk and found a folded document sealed in wax, a DNA profile, stamped with the logo of a private genetic lab. Evelyn's fingers trembled as she read it. The stallion tested had Bowen Maddox listed as the owner, but under offspring match, it didn't show Talon's reign as the sire. It showed Bowen Maddox. The paper slipped from her hands. Rustwood Fire wasn't just an illegally bred horse. He was her father's. Her half-brother. She backed away from the trunk, dizzy, one hand covering her mouth. The silence in the barn below now felt deafening, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. And suddenly, she understood why her father couldn't let the horse be destroyed. Because doing so would have meant erasing the last living proof of a choice he made in secret, and a life he helped create. The morning light felt colder than it should have. Evelyn didn't bother with coffee or breakfast. She drove straight into town, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The letter from Grace and the DNA report sat folded on the seat beside her, like silent passengers carrying the weight of 17 years. There was only one person left to confront. Sadie Ellsworth was watering her porch flowers when Evelyn pulled up. She looked up with a forced smile, but it faltered the moment she saw Evelyn's face. "We need to talk," Evelyn said, holding up the sealed letter. "Now." Sadie's porch creaked under the weight of Evelyn's footsteps as she stepped closer. For a moment, Sadie didn't move. Then, quietly, she opened the screen door and gestured for her to come inside. The air in the house was heavy with silence and old perfume. Photographs lined the shelves, none of Grace Monroe. "I found the letters," Evelyn began, her voice low but firm. "And the DNA report. You knew. All these years, you knew the truth about Rustwood Fire, about what he really is." Sadie lowered herself into a chair, her hands trembling slightly. "Your father asked me to protect you. To protect his legacy. He was trying to do the right thing, after doing something terribly wrong." "Protect me?" Evelyn snapped. "By lying? By letting Grace disappear and letting that horse be labeled dangerous, untrainable, worthless?" Sadie sighed, her eyes glistening. "Grace was going to go public. Bowen begged her not to. He said the fallout would ruin everything, the ranch, your family name. She refused. They fought. And the next day she was gone. Did he hurt her?" "No," Sadie said quickly, shaking her head. "No, Bowen wasn't violent. She left on her own, but she left broken. He never forgave himself. That's why he hid Rustwood. Why he never sold him or allowed anyone to register him properly." Evelyn paced the living room, her boots thudding against the wood floor. "I could expose it all, you know. Every bit of it. The falsified records. The breeding violation. The cover-up. People deserve to know." "Yes," Sadie said, looking up. "But you have to ask yourself, who are you doing it for? For justice? For revenge? Or for him?" The room fell silent. Evelyn stood still. Rustwood Fire hadn't just been hidden. He'd been protected. Not because he was a mistake, but because he was proof that even the most flawed people can love something too much to destroy it. Now, Evelyn held the truth in her hands. And the whole town would soon find out what she planned to do with it. The arena was quiet, the morning sky still holding onto its silver mist. Evelyn stood at the gate, saddle in hand, eyes fixed on Rustwood Fire as he trotted slowly along the fence line. A week had passed since her confrontation with Sadie. The letters were still locked in her drawer. The DNA report too. But inside her, something had shifted. She no longer needed a spotlight or a microphone to feel like her father had been seen. She had found the truth. And somehow that was enough. Rustwood had changed too. He was calmer, more responsive, like some invisible weight had lifted from both of them. For days, she had worked with him in silence, letting the bond build naturally. No force, no fear. Just trust, rebuilt one breath at a time. And now, for the first time, he stood completely still as she approached, his deep brown eyes calm, waiting. She saddled him slowly, fingers moving with reverence. "Let's do this," she whispered. When she mounted, he didn't flinch. They rode together under the open sky, hooves cutting through the soft dirt, wind weaving through Evelyn's hair like memory. At first, it was cautious, small circles, deliberate turns. But then something clicked. Rustwood's muscles relaxed beneath her, and he began to move with a grace and power that took her breath away. She wasn't just riding a horse. She was writing a story that had almost been erased. At the far end of the arena, Marla Jennings stood watching, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She didn't speak. But as Rustwood broke into a smooth canter and Evelyn's posture straightened in the saddle like she had been born there, Marla's mouth parted slightly, not in judgment, but in something like awe. After the ride, Evelyn dismounted and walked Rustwood around the ring. The breeze carried the faintest whisper of wildflowers and wood smoke. She paused, looking up at the empty bleachers, the hills beyond, the life that now stretched before her like an open trail. She'd decided to keep the letters. to protect Grace's memory quietly, and to honor her father's complicated truth, not by exposing it, but by living in a way he never could. Open, honest, brave. And Rustwood Fire would never be sold, never forgotten. He was family now, not because of blood, but because they had both survived what was meant to break them.